And finally, the hand. Would you give me a hand? So, the hand is divided into three sections. We have this is the wrist, which are the carpal bones. This is the metacarpal region that makes up your palm, and the dorsum of your hand. And these are your fingers um, consisting on the phalanges. So in here in purple, we can see the wrist, and this is the anatomical wrist. Uh, it's not this wrist that we are being told there is our wrist where you place your watch and your bracelets and whatever. So the anatomical wrist is distal to that and is this. See, consists of 8 carpal bones. On the palm of your hand, you have the metacarpal bones, and in your fingers, you have the phalanges. The carpal bones are divided into 2 rows. We have a proximal row closer to the body and a distal row far away from the body. So we name these carpal bones starting from lateral, from your pollex, from your thumb, to medial, both rows. So we start naming the first carpal bone on the proximal row is the scaphoid. So let me point it in here. Well, let's do it in the anterior view, easier. In the anterior view, this is the pollex, so this is the scaphoid, the lunate, the triquetrum, and the pisiform. And the distal row, we have 4 more bones, and we have here the trapezium, the trapezoid, the capitate, and the hamate. Memorization, that's what it is. Now, important to know, the radiocarpal joint is formed by the distal end of the radius and carpal bones. But in specific, there are 2 carpal bones that are forming this articulation, and of course, they're located on the proximal row of the carpal bones. And I have highlighted these names for you, so it's easier for you to find. So we have the scaphoid and the lunate are the 2 carpal bones that articulate with the radius to form the radiocarpal joint. So in here we have the hand. This is the pollex. So this, starting from lateral, this is the scaphoid and this is the lunate. And these 2 articulate like this with the radius. Now, good moment to remember that the ulna is actually separated from these carpal bones by a piece of fibrocartilage. So it's not involved in the movement of the wrist. Radius is involved in the movement of the wrist, and the radiocarpal joint we can perform. Look at this. This is anterior. So this is flexion, extension, hyperextension. In a frontal view, this is lateral. So this is abduction, adduction. Let me show it to you. This one is not working, so anatomical position. So this is the flexion, extension in anatomical position, hyperextension when you pass the posterior to the posterior plane. In the frontal plane, a lateral movement away from your body. I'm abducting the hand, so that's abduction. There is also called radial deviation because the radius is located on this side, remember? So radial deviation, very handy to remember that. And the opposite movement is adduction with 2 D's, and this is also called ulnar deviation. Those are the movements that we can perform at the radial carpal articulation. Now, distal to the carpal bones, we're going to find 5 metacarpal bones, and we're going to name these metacarpals starting with your pollex again with your thumb. So this is the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth metacarpal bones. And remember, they're making up just your hand, the palm and the dorsum of your hand. Uh, Remember I told you there's one more bone that it's upside down? The head, this is the base of the metacarpal, and the base points distal to the body. So these the base articulates with the carpal bones. Okay, now in here the base articulate with the carpal bones to form the carpal metacarpal articulation, and the head of the metacarpals articulate with the proximal phalanx to form the metacarpal phalangeal articulation, which are your knuckles. Okay, so metacarpal phalangeal articulation, your knuckles. In here we have, this is the metacarpal articulation, the base of the metacarpal with the carpal bones. In here we have the head of the metacarpal with the proximal phalanx. So this is the knuckles or metacarpal phalangeal joint. Then we have distal to that one row. Every single digit has one row of, or it has one proximal phalanx. Okay, and all the digits has a distal phalanx also, but only digits from the second to the fifth digit have middle phalanx, meaning that the hallux, the pollex, or the first digit doesn't have a middle phalanx. So here is the pollex. It has the first metacarpal, the proximal phalanx, the distal phalanx. The rest of the fingers have a metacarpal, a proximal phalanx, a middle phalanx, and a distal phalanx. The articulations that we can find in here is, well, we described already the metacarpal phalangeal. Now we have two articulations between phalanges. So one between the proximal and the middle phalanx, and another one between the middle and the distal phalanx. So we need different names to name them. So this one is proximal to your body, and this one is distal. So we call this the proximal interphalangeal articulation, and this one the distal interphalangeal articulations. Look that, please notice that in the pollex we have the metacarpal phalangeal articulation and an interphalangeal articulation. We don't have proximal and distal because we only have two phalanges. Okay, well, that's just to show you the radiocarpal articulation between the radius and the scaphoid and the lunate. And here are the movements of flexion, extension, hyperextension, ulnar deviation or adduction, and radial deviation or abduction. And in here, another way to see all the joints in your hand. This is a matter just if you are good identifying the bones of your hand, the articulation is very easy. You just have to name the two bones that are forming the articulations. So this is the metacarpal between the distal row of the carpal bones and the metacarpal bones. Then we have the metacarpal phalangeal. These are your knuckles, and this one too. In blue, we have the proximal interphalangeal joints, and in yellow, we have the distal interphalangeal joints. On the thumb, on your pollex, we have only the green one, the metacarpophalangeal joint, and an interphalangeal joint. Okay, this concludes the first part of appendicular skeleton. In the next section, the next week, we're going to cover the lower limbs, the pelvic girdle, and the joints that we can find in these parts of the skeleton. Study. See you later, alligators.